Welcome. My name is Janelle Hazard, and I am the Executive Director and Curator at TEFRA Institute of Contemporary Art, formerly Greater Reston Art Center as of recently. We are excited to share our rebrand with everyone. We have a great program tonight. You were just listening to Strange Fruit by Nina Simone, a song chosen by Omolara Williams McCallister, who is this presentation tonight is focused on her work, and Rob Ferrell will be responding to her work. I don't want to take too long. I'm glad to see many of our board of directors here. Thank you so much for your support and your dedication. Without further ado, I'll pass it on to Erica Harrison, our associate curator.
Hi, thank you everyone. Thank you, Janelle. So happy to be here this evening for this very special program. TEFRA Institute of Contemporary Art presents the Mary B. Howard Invitational as a group exhibition where we invite outside curators alongside myself to shepherd the creation of new works in response to proposals. The current iteration was generated by the dynamic duo Zoe Charlton and Tim Zaud, our guest curators and co-founders of Syndicate. In alignment with Syndicate's projects and their commitment to supporting studio research and experimentation with an emphasis on gender, sexuality, and race, artists were invited to submit proposals for the exhibition using the title "An Excellent Thought About a Quality Idea" as a prompt. The resulting work displayed in the gallery is an extension of the insightful dialogue that occurred over the last 9 months between the artists and the curators. An Excellent Thought About a Quality Idea features 5 artists: Rain Alexander, Matthew Mann, Omolara Williams McCallister, Zia Palmer, and Mojde Reza Ipor. The exhibition is named in memory of Mary B. Howard, an artist, longtime board member, and staunch supporter of TEFRA Institute of Contemporary Art. As Zoe Charlton said at our opening reception, the installation of the exhibition is just the beginning. The conversations that take place afterward are what really make it happen. And so tonight, with the help of our Education and Public Programs Manager, Sarah Behrens, to introduce our special guest, we have this very special creative response. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and to our special guest. Thanks.
Thank you, Janelle and Erica. So again, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for this evening's creative response sponsored by Reston Community Center. Before I introduce the program and our guest responder, I will go over just a few general housekeeping notes for this evening's talk. Upon entering this Zoom meeting, you will have been automatically muted, and we kindly request that you keep your microphone off during the presentation to help us facilitate a clear presentation. Although your audio will be turned off, we would still love to see you. So if you have a camera and you're comfortable with this option, please feel free to keep your video on. During the presentation, we encourage you to type any questions you might have for the speakers into the chat feature. And at the end of the talk, we will open it up for a Q&A by reading those questions submitted. You can also use the raise hand feature, and we can call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. And of course, this event will be recorded. We're recording now, so if you would not like to be included in the recording but wish to listen to the talk, simply keep your microphone and camera off for the duration of the event. So the Creative Response Program invites individuals from diverse backgrounds and areas of expertise to respond to the work on view at TEFRA ICA. Earlier this month, we heard from Adrielle Lewis, who responded to the work of Mojde Razaipur and Zia Palmer, shown in this exhibition. Tonight, we will hear from Rob Ferrell, who will respond to the work of Omolara Williams McCallister. And next week, on Thursday, February 4th at 6 p.m., we hope you'll join us to hear from Isabel Manalo, who will respond to the work of Rain Alexander and Matthew Mann. So I am going to go ahead and introduce Rob. Rob is a senior organizer and founding member of Organizing Black, a grassroots member-led organization in Baltimore City that focuses on transformational direct action, political education, and participatory governance. Rob is grounded in the Black radical tradition and fighting for the liberation of all Black people by any means necessary. Rob's lens-based artwork bears witness to the magic, joy, and transformation of Black organizing. His most recent body of work, the Mandala series, is an exploration of the generative nature of Black power through portraiture of Black freedom fighters and organizers inside maroon spaces, physical and spiritual spaces liberated from an oppressive society. Rob is dedicated to visually archiving the movement for Black lives during his lifetime. And you can follow along the journey on Instagram at @BeMore_radical. So Rob, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
I'm going to unmute myself. Thank you for the lovely introduction, both Janelle and Erica and Sarah. And thank you, O, for your amazing and wonderful work. I'm just privileged to be here and to respond to it. I wanted to just have a moment of accountability there for something I put in the chat. I was like, Stand Up Baltimore, that is very ableist. And I was just excited, and we have to be able to call ourselves out when needed, right? So I'm just excited for Baltimore to be here, and I apologize for that phrasing. But yeah, I'm just, without further ado, I would love to move into the response to O's work. So if you can hit the next slide. This is a quote that means a lot to me from a comrade that means a lot to me. Activists leverage stories to explain complex ideas. Numbers become numbing. Tables and charts don't usually strike us as viscerally as stories do. And while there are so many dominant forces affirming that facts simply don't matter, stories do. Stories draw out emotions. They allow us to see, taste, and feel moments. If the stories we tell about Black people's experiences of resistance and resilience are incomplete, our movements to transform them, to enact them, will be insufficient and ineffective. And I would want folks to just take a moment and sit with that. I think this is, in a lot of ways, one of the major impacts that this work had on me. This work frames for me how we need to think about how we're coming into the work that I'm doing and that we're doing together. And it's an effort to illustrate for us in a very visceral way the stories that have been passed down to us about this object, the news. So I'll move on to the next slide, and we'll take in some of the work together. The first thing that really stood out to me when I walked into this space is I was immersed in Blackness. All I could see around me was Black. The walls, the ground, which is both a bit disorienting. I like the darkness of night, but it was also comforting to me in a strange way. Um, the rich black dirt and the mulch underneath my feet crunched as I walked through. And I found myself walking softly, trying to muffle the sound. It took me back to times of running through the fallen pine needles growing up in rural North Carolina, at least for the time that I lived there. Um, and it took me to thoughts of my ancestors that traveled through darkness with no GPS, sometimes no modern maps at all, just the stars and the maps that were cornrowed into the hair of their comrades as they ran for freedom. And the ropes brought me right back to the fact that many of those folks didn't make it. And it made me quite emotional, I have to admit. The video plays in the background, as you saw, it was projected onto the wall. The black hands, they were out of focus at first, but they were very clearly trying to tie a knot. You just couldn't see how they were doing it. They tied the knot out of twine, and then the hands come back into focus. And then a finished knot, the finished noose appears into focus, and my heart just kind of skipped a beat. There's something jarring about seeing black hands tie that knot. Then the black hands slowly and simply untie the noose. And all that's left is the hanging twine, the hanging rope. And I found myself again opening emotionally, mentally, and spiritually to the possibilities of what we can do. I'd never seen a noose untied before, right? And this is such an image, a symbol that's singed into our collective hearts and memories with fear and all of the intimidation, death, murder, all these things that we associated with, and it was so simply untied. The noose then made out of twine resembled the life-size ropes that were hanging into the space. If you go back to the previous slide, you see what I'm talking about. I went from seeing this video of the hands untying the twine, and then immediately was confronted with the life-size rope, right? And the immediacy of a rope of that nature possibly hanging someone like me or my ancestors in the past. So it's just very emotionally charged experience, and especially for someone like myself that knows the history and lives and is living history, right, of Black resistance today, is heavy. And it made me think about how many lives might have been taken by those ropes. Who am I to know? And the fact that one rope could have taken many lives. Who's to say that they didn't take it down and reuse it again, right? My attention turns to the flag, and I'm confronted with a sea of nooses tied. And the concept starts to open for me, right? It starts to become real to the work that I do every day. Now, this system is hard at work taking Black lives, whether that be the police, prisons, our healthcare system, our joke of an education system, our school to prison pipeline, the military, you name it, right? This is all becomes real to me in this flag and in this sea of nooses. And then I read the text on the wall. So if you could go to the opening, yeah. And what's to stop us from pulling it all down? Nothing. Go ahead, touch it, try it, take it into your own hands. So I accept the invitation to step into my own power, something I challenge others to do all the time, but I've never been really confronted in this kind of visceral, emotional way. Oddly, in this box, right? This created moment, something I wasn't expecting, to say the least. And I go to untie one of the nooses. I tried untying it with one hand, and I found myself watching the video that's projected on the far side. So if you look at this wall, and if you're looking at the flag, the video is being projected behind you. So I find myself like looking over my shoulder, almost trying to follow the instructions. And it wasn't easy for me. It wasn't easy for me to do it. Not as easy as the video made it seem anyway. I ended up having to use both hands, even though I tried pulling it just with one. And but I eventually did. I untied it. And the feeling of untying the noose and pulling the rope from the structure completely, just yanking it out, because it took some force to pull it out. I couldn't just like gently, I had to like yank it out. That feeling was liberating. It was exhilarating. It was like a weight had been lifted. And it felt as if so much more is possible for me, even in that one moment, that simple act. The closest feelings that I can relate to that we're crossing into my fraternity at a young age, like 19, right? But having gone through like 2 to 3 months of psychological torture, and then crossing into this family, and it's like, oh my God, everything, this whole new world opens up to me, right? More possibilities. Finishing running my first marathon. If anyone's a distance runner, you know what it's like to finish a distance that is just not, you don't even think it's possible until you finally do it. You're like, oh my, like what more is possible for me? Both my mind and my body in this particular example. And then another example of a feeling that even comes close to it is holding the line of civil disobedience during a direct action. The particular instance that comes to mind is I chained my body with motorcycle chains to obstruct the entrance to the inauguration during Donald Trump's administration, the inauguration of Donald Trump's administration. And those feelings of opening, of creating new possibilities, that's what pulling one of those nooses from that flag felt like. And I hope everyone on this call has the opportunity to go and see the piece in person and experience that. One thing that I want to call attention to is looking back over my shoulder and trying to follow the instructions reminded me of the way that Black liberation work actually works, right? Like I don't know the answer. I don't know how to get free. If we knew how to get free, we would be free already, right? But I do know that my ancestors have left lessons for me. They've left examples, they've left writings, right? They've left scholarship. They've left all of these clues, right? Not only that, but a culture and a discipline of how to do the work. And that is something that I rely on, right? As we continue to experiment and to use our imagination to find the right answers. So that brought that to life for me. That lesson that I know viscerally was brought to life through this artwork. All right, so after I pulled that one thing, that one noose down, that one piece of twine, and I had that kind of euphoric feeling, I suddenly realized how many more there were to untie. And you go from this high to this, oh my God, this is what we're up against. And I realized just how many more needed to be untied for the project to be complete. I couldn't even count them, right? Just uncountable, just so many, a sea of them. So how long would it take me as an individual to sit there and do that? That's where my mind went. I was like, holy shit, this is a lot. But then I thought about what would happen if I had power in numbers, right? If I had organization, if I had everyone on this call with me in that space, or maybe not in COVID times, but you get it. You get the idea, right? What if we all committed to untying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 at a time, right? How fast could we untie this thing together? Could we tear it all down? And what's to stop us from doing that? So that experience was a very emotional one for me. And I'm still processing it together. And I had the lovely experience of building and talking with O yesterday. But collective action, yes, in the chat, burn it all down. But it can't be done alone. It can't be done alone. But it left me with questions, right? The piece left me with questions, with things to take home, with homework, if you will. How do we broaden our imagination? Like our lack of imagination of what's possible stops us from taking this bold action. And it's often, if you look at the purpose of the noose, right? And I talked to O about this directly, so this is coming partly from them, but obviously from the experience of seeing it in our society. Whenever a noose is presented, right? There's outrage, there's fear. It plants all of these feelings into Black people. And then in white society, there's this kind of feigning of innocence of like, oh, it wasn't intentional, or it wasn't meant for this or that. And then it kind of just ends there. Like nothing happens. There's no recourse. There's no consequence. We're just kind of stuck repeating the same cycles of history over and over and over again. But with imagination, right? What if we can just pull the rope and untie it? And that was just such a powerful revelation to me. So if you can go to the next slide. Valerie, that is imaginative. Why don't we burn it? Like, maybe not in the gallery, but you know, like. Thank you for sharing that. You can go to the next slide. So again, this work pushes us to reimagine what is possible outside of the limits of whiteness. What happens when we move past these barriers, these nooses that are presented to us sometimes every day, figuratively or literally? What happens when we say, fuck you, I'm gonna do what I want? And you liberate yourself when you step into your own power. And when we do that collectively, what's possible? You can move to the next slide. How do we do that? Organizing, my friends. Organizing is how we do that. We do that together. where we take the dream, we take the imagination, and we put it into action. We put it into action. So that's what my work looks like every day. And I think that's why Tim and Zoe thought of me for this response. And I'm really appreciative of the opportunity. But what is organizing exactly, right? It's taking the action to move people together towards a common goal. So if we all agree white supremacy is terrible, it's fucked up, it's wrong, we all have to actually be a part of that process of undoing it, of untying the nooses together, right? So move to the next slide, please. And these are just a couple images that I took over this summer in 2020. It's the closest really that example of what I've seen in my lifetime, and I think it could speak for most of us, right? Like, when have we ever seen collective action being taken in every single like major metropolitan area of America, and sometimes even across the world, towards collective liberation? You can go to the next slide. These are actions that were photos from actions that were led by teenagers here in Baltimore. And it's just so inspiring to see the radical imagination flourishing at every level, and to see people step into their power in ways that they hadn't before. Next slide, please. Yeah, these are my photos. But often, even after that, right, even after these actions, even after these mass mobilizations, I didn't put my own credit in there, it's my fault. People come to me and then to other folks that have been doing this work, and they're like, now what? Now what do I do? What do I do? And I just want to walk folks through what I think is most important to take this collective action together, to join into this fight, right? Number one, you have to explicitly define your core principles and values. What do you actually believe in? And what are you fighting for? You have to know, right? If you don't know what you're fighting for, you're just going to be out here willy-nilly. You already know what I came to do. Like, came to get people into the fight. Like, you're not just going to come here, look at art, and go home and think it's sweet. This shit is not sweet. Like, our lives are literally on the line right now. Okay. So once you understand what you're fighting for, you define your core principles and values, right? Now, where do you put that to work? You find a political home organization. What is a political home organization, right? What is, Rob, these are terms I've never heard of before. Can you make it plain for me, right? It's an organization where you enter into principled struggle with people around these ideas, where you have shared ideas, shared principles, shared goals, shared praxis. How do you do the work? And you find an organization that shares that with you, right? So if you believe in LGBTQ rights and you believe in Black liberation and you are Black, ideally you're going to find a Black-led, queer-affirming organization, right? If you're white, you're going to find a white organization that organizes white people, hopefully. If you're looking for a multiracial organization, that's where it gets a little dicey. But again, the alignment of principles and values should guide you, right? So what do they believe in? How do they believe in doing it? And that praxis really matters. Otherwise, you're just going to kind of get thrown all over the place, and it's going to be really messy. But yeah, find your people, essentially, and work collectively with them. Struggle collectively with them. Take action collectively with them. You can't do this shit alone. Like me standing in front of that flag, trying to figure out how I'm going to untie all these, it don't work, okay? You got to find an organization where you can take collective action with other people, right? Number 3, identify your roles and interests. What does that mean? Well, what do you have to offer? What is your role in the fight? What are you going to be doing? Start with what you know. If O's an artist, if I'm an artist, if I'm a photographer, I'm going to bring that skill set to the table. If I'm a fundraiser, I'm going to raise money for the movement. If I'm a bookkeeper, I'm going to keep the book straight so that the feds don't come after us, right? Like, what do you do already? And hopefully you want to keep doing that, right? If you want to find another role or interest, you can do that. But find your role, play your role within that shared space, within that organization. Number 4, find at least one older mentor, especially if you're white. White people be out here just doing anything, any kind of way, not realizing that there's white people that have been struggling for Black liberation for decades. Right? Granted, there's not that many of them, but they exist. And there are people that you can look to as guides, look to for guidance when you're struggling with something, so you don't come and burden your Black friends with that bullshit, because I don't want to hear that, to be honest. Number 5, interrogate your relationship to power. What does that mean, Rob? Like, make it plain. You're using all these like activist words. What kind of power do you have? Again, like, what kind of privilege do you have? I don't want to say privilege, because you actually have power. It's not just privilege. You actually have privilege is a passive word. Power is an active one, right? So you might be actively oppressing people in your life. Sorry to break it to you, but it's true. So what kind of relationship to power do you have? And how can you leverage that power for the right causes, right? For Black liberation, for queer liberation, for trans liberation, for immigrant rights, right? For abortion, right? For all of these things that we're collectively fighting for. But you got to know what kind of power you're sitting on. You got to know what kind of relationship to power you have. And even if you don't have traditional power, you might have the ability to take action. And then that is power in and of itself, right? So when I said earlier, I need to step into my own power and tear this shit down, that is me understanding that I have capacity, right, to take action. And that is power in and of itself. Number 6, find a battle buddy and accountability partner. You're most likely going to find one in your organization because they share your values, share your goals, etc. And you're working towards the same ends. But it may not be. It might be your partner. When you say you want to do something, who's gonna know when you ain't doing that shit? Your partner, right? Maybe it's a friend, a best friend of yours. Maybe it's a parent. You have a relationship with your parent that's really tight like that, right? That you share your goals, your aspirations, your longings with. Find a battle buddy and accountability partner that's going to keep you straight. That's going to keep you on target, right? To accomplishing your goals and to moving. And it's something that I didn't really put in here, but I'll add it in. All of this is committing to a process of transformation for yourself. And that's something that I don't think people say explicitly. I think once you get into the work, you understand it over time. But you actually have to unlearn all the toxic nonsense that you've learned over time. You have to be inquisitive, to be curious around the ways in which you continue the cycles, unfortunately. And try to take your actions and align them a little bit closer with your values over time. We all have a little bit of that gap, right? It's just the nature of human beings. But when you're this far apart, it's not cute. Like when you're saying this and you're doing this. And so how can you transform over time and bring those things closer to alignment? So that's my little spiel. You can go to the how to bring organizing into action. We'll move to the next slide. I've lost track of what's going on in the chat here, so let me take 1 second and catch up. Ooh, you're dropping org names. All right, so political homes, yes, BLM Surge DC, Surge Baltimore. Those are 2 different things. If you're somewhere in the middle, if you're somewhere else, Southerners on new ground for sure. BYP Black Youth Project 100. If you're 18 and 35 years old and Black, that's in Chicago and national as well. White ideological thought is another phrase. Topag, can you expound on that a little bit? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Con mi gente, if you are Southwest and LA. Casa de Maryland, if you are here in Maryland and Pennsylvania and Virginia. Um, Wonderful. There's a whole list. Let's keep that list going. If y'all could collate that and send that out afterwards, that would be wonderful. But for the sake of this, I want to actually move to a question and answer session. I'm done. This is my response. I'm done. But I'm really interested in starting a dialogue. And so I have a question for O. O, I would love to know, how has making this work transformed you?
Can we hear me? Yes? No? Somebody? Okay. You can't hear me? You can hear me? Still no?
Just a little faint.
It's a little faint. Okay. I will just talk loudly, and I can see Rob and the Tefra people. So if you could tap your ear if you can't hear me, or if you see somebody else who is signaling that they can't hear me, and then I can speak more loudly and make sure that I'm projecting. How was I transformed? So the prompt was to make a work based on an older work, but to not do just the same thing, to somehow like stretch yourself, stretch your practice, use a new material, use a new method, something like that. And so for me, part of the stretch was using video, because I'd never used video before. Hi, little person. And one of the things that changed for me, I think, within this work was when I made the original work, which was 3,440 nooses in the shape of a cross. Every time that I put it up, so I made it in like 2012, and I didn't get to install it until 2019. And when I went to install it, it was heavy. Like I hadn't prepared myself emotionally, psychologically for the weight of the installation process itself. Just as I was sitting there and, counting the nooses and making sure that there was enough and making sure that everybody was accounted for, I realized that I couldn't just sit and count to 3,000 when I was counting people who had been Black people who had been lynched between 1880 and 1968. And I really struggled. Like I had to phone some friends just to actually sit with me through the installation because it was so heavy and so difficult. And this one, I felt really differently about it, even though, I felt really differently about this one, even though it was, a little more than twice the amount of nooses because of the orientation towards it, which is the like, oh, we're going to take these all out. The other ones are kind of static and they hang in the structure and they don't get taken out and they're supposed to stay there. But the idea of this one, I was saying it in the chat earlier, that, my ideal installation for this project would be, not during COVID, so that people could actually interact with it in the gallery freely, and you'd have people coming in, and maybe those people would be different folks than the folks that I normally interact with in organizing spaces who are already kind of radicalized. And I would love to see the entire structure just pulled apart. Like I would love to see all of the nooses pulled down. I'd love to see people tear the staples out. There's also one staple for every noose in the piece, even though I didn't functionally need it. And I would like to see us, rip it from the wall and burn it, have a bonfire and then use the ashes to like plant a garden, And so the thing that shifted for me, which was really actually prompted, I should say, by Odili Donald Odita, who's an artist. I think he's based in Philly still. He's an Igbo artist, and I had a visit with him while I was in residency at the Vermont Studio Center, and he'd asked me about my work, but where's the transformation? So he'd seen some other pieces of mine. He hadn't seen this or the other news piece, but another kind of process-based, community-engaged work, and he said, okay, so you have this narrative here, and it's a heavy narrative, and it's a true narrative, and it's our narrative, and you're giving people an opportunity to tell their story, but where is the transformation? So I think for me, I feel really proud of this piece, and the thing that it changed was that I think I got there, like based on what I put into the world and based on hearing your response and other people's response to the work, that feeling inside you. Zora Neale Hurston describes it in Their Eyes Were Watching God. She's talking about
Janie, who's the main character, who's this Black woman who's been attached to, you know, like a man for most of her life and has had to shrink herself within this man's household. And there's this one line where she talks about Janie and she says something fell off the shelf inside of her. And it was her image of Joe Stark, who was her husband at the time, who was abusive and controlling, but very charismatic. And I just think like that's what I want to happen for people in a very particular way, because that moment in their eyes were watching God, that falling off of a shelf wasn't a like, oh no, the vase broke. It was like a, oh man, like now I'm free. Now I'm not contained anymore. You know, and she shifted the way that she was working. So I feel like I am actually facilitating that process of having something fall off the shelf in front of people, inside of people, you know, at least in you. And that's important to me because you are a person who can hold me accountable to whether or not this work, you know, as an artist in the art world, I could say like, yeah, this is what I'm trying to do. I want to connect this to organizing. And people who aren't in organizing would be like, this is great. You're totally doing that because it's in your statement. But it could not be doing it, you know? And so I appreciate the accountability of having you, another organizer, come in and be like, yeah, this did the thing. You did the thing. So that's one of the things that changed for me with this work.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you. I love seeing how the work evolves over time. And I have another question. I don't know if the moderators want to jump in around time, but questions that I would love to ask the audience. So for the Black members of the audience, how can you untie the next figurative noose you come across in life? So maybe not in this exhibition, but when white power structure says, no, you can't, you've stepped too far, you've taken up space that you shouldn't, how can you say, you know, fuck you, I'm gonna keep doing what I want to do? How can you do that in your life? And
that's
then
for me, or that's a question for everybody
question
else?
for Black members of the audience, and it's either rhetorical or if you have an answer, that would be dope as well.
Take up more space.
Thanks, though. Anybody else? I know there's a lot of Black people out there, individual Black people that I know.
Go ahead and speak up. You don't have to be called on.
Yeah, you see me raising my hand, Rob. This is an amazing session. For me, it's being a priest in a African traditional religion, born into it. So that's one. And the other half of it is creating my art and teaching people of all cultures what it means to see God differently, right? To see God not necessarily as a person, but more as an energy. So in my paintings, in my art classes, my stories and things like that. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. Thank you for stepping into that challenge. When I talk to folks about how I got into organizing, and when I reflect on what my SNCC elders have told me about how they got into organizing, the common thread is always a challenge from another Black person. It's never some noose that was hung in my school or some random incident of violence. It's always a challenge from another Black person to step into your power. So I challenge all of you to find your power and to step into it. And the other question I had was for Black folks is, what other symbols and cycles of trauma do you want to interrupt? To me, that was a big theme of this piece.
There's a request for a repetition of the question.
Yep. What other symbols and cycles of trauma do you want to interrupt? Right. To me, this piece represents interrupting the cycle of trauma from the symbol of the noose. So are there any other symbols that come to mind or cycles of trauma that you want to interrupt? Thank you for putting in the chat.
More quickly than I do.
I would say I work in an organization where we always do a lot of, every time we have a group meeting, we start off with a meditation, and we started to kind of deconstruct that and looking at like Nat Ministry and their idea of like rest as a form of resistance. And so now we're starting to incorporate rest as a form of resistance, which I think has now shifted the conversation about why we're doing this meditative practice at my organization. So that was something that I introduced and was well received. So that would be one way.
That's beautiful. Was your organization like a wellness oriented, or is that just
no? We're an education we're an education consultancy, but yeah, we were doing a lot of these like meditations that were like, you know, white British people talking calmly, which is fine. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think there were a lot of people who felt like it didn't mean anything to them. And then when we sort of recontextualized it and said, hey, actually, you know, this is part of taking ourselves back and taking control of who we are as people and allowing ourselves a space to rest, it really kind of revolutionized the whole process. And then, you know, it no longer was like a challenge to get people to do it. It was almost, you know, a revolutionary idea.
Yes, that is actively disrupting the culture of white supremacy. And I love that. I love that. Thank you. So I have a question for everyone now. So I invite non-Black people to participate. What happens when we untie all of the nooses and the identity of America is gone?
I mean, are you saying that identity is gone, or are you saying identity is expanded?
Well,
there might be a better way. There might be a better way of rephrasing that for sure, but you can interpret it however you like.
Well, yeah, my thinking is that when the nooses are gone, it's a growth and an evolution. It's a moving beyond the violence and the pain while acknowledging it fully and sort of understanding like what came before doesn't have to be the way that it is, and that moving into a future state is the goal, is always the goal with everything, you know, with any kind of growth metaphor. I think it can be really productive. I think it would feel really productive after a long time of, you know, acknowledging pain and violence and still not being able to make the big moves just because of this, you know, the crushing weight of the status quo and the desire for power and control through violence.
Yeah. The reason, the way this question came from in my head is the experience of seeing white people or people that identify as white go into predominantly Black spaces for the first time.
Part of what has led Democrats to call for Green to be expelled from her position as a member of Congress. Now, that
Wendy, mind meeting. Thank you. So that's where that reference of gone came from, is like when folks identify, their whole identity is wrapped up in power and power over other people. What happens when that's taken away from them? You have to find something new. So yes, expansion is definitely a more open and positive and forward-thinking way of phrasing it. But either way, I think the lesson is the same. What happens when you lose that?
These are some amazing questions.
Hey, Rob. Hi.
Thinking the same thing.
my silence isn't disregard for the question. It's more trying to take in and process the question.
Maybe it's a question for homework, and we can open up the space for open questions. I do want to check in with the moderators around time.
Looks like we have about 5 minutes left. I think the idea of having homework, I've already listed 5 or 6 things that I need to look up. So I really appreciate that. I think Valiskaya, if I said that incorrectly, sorry, had a question.
Hi, everyone. Rob, thank you so much for facilitating this amazing conversation and such incredible work, Omolara. I'm so excited to see where it has developed. I guess I just wanted to reflect on your question, Rob, and I really appreciate the organizing perspective that you're bringing to this. I wish there were more conversations like this. And I guess I just would offer, as a white person, also an immigrant to the United States who comes from Germany, that I feel like as someone who comes from a country that has such a horrifying history of genocide of the Jewish people and lots of other people, that in that country, many people have had to wrestle with what does it mean to build a new identity that is not connected to being in the that is cut off to some extent from some of your ancestry or some of your roots. And I think as someone who now lives in the United States and has to wrestle with what does it mean to embrace aspects of my white identity, given the histories that precede me and that I benefit from, I think you can sort of turn yourself inside out a little bit in the process and not and find a new sense of identity in being in relationship to actively trying to undo those power structures. I've never tried to verbalize that quite that way, but Omolara and I have talked about that. And so, yeah, that was my attempt. So thank you for that question and for the homework.
Thank you, V, for stepping up. I appreciate the way that you do that.
Cool. So we just have 9 minutes. If anybody has any questions, then we're here to talk about them, whether it's about what Rob talked about or what I talked about or about the work. Let's talk about it.
Hi, it's Zoe. Do either of you ever feel hesitant if your work is read as instructional? It tells people how to do things or what to do, and is that ever a concern?
You know, the concern for me is how to actually make it instructional and get the thing that I want to get across, but without breaking the suspension of disbelief. And so I have a theater background. I come out of theater, and which I think also is part of why I have an orientation towards the black box rather than the white cube, besides generally having an orientation towards blackness. But something that is different about theater than the art world is that in the theater world, you focus so much on the experience that you're creating for the viewer. So there's so much conversation about, you know, when you're singing and you're working on your phrasing and you're working on your breath control and you're working on, you know, your face, your posture, you know, your body, the question is always, what emotion are you communicating? What are you intending to convey here? And you go back to that, you know, and it's reflected back at you, like, you're not conveying that, that's not what I'm getting. And then you change it to be able to make it convey the thing. But in the art world, work is very centered around the intention, the experience, the desire of the artist. And there can often be a disconnect or a disregard for the audience, just like, I'm gonna make what I want to make and I'm gonna put it up, y'all be blessed, I shared it with you, you know, is kind of the orientation that you have. And you have this, what I think is irresponsible thing that is happening in arts education too, where people can go through the entire arts education system and never be asked about the impact of their work, or the implications of it. And so that's how you have people ending up in things like the Whitney Biennial, which is supposed to be, you know, like one of the top exhibitions of American artists, who are doing work that is violent and disrespectful. And in this case, I'm referring to a painting about Emmett Till by a white artist, or of Emmett Till by a white artist. And so for me, I want to be able to provide context, and I view my work as infiltrating the art world. And so I'm infiltrating the art world to talk to folks that I might not talk to in the organizing world because they might not come over there. Hi, Micaiah. And so I want it to be instructional, yes, but I also want, when you're in that space and you're ensconced in that experience, to not break the experience. And when things are too instructional, when it's like, okay, now read this manual, it can be, that sort of thing can happen a little bit, but it is instructional. You know, as Rob said, he was like, I gotta pull this thing up, I gotta look at this video, there's a how-to video on how to do the thing, you know. I don't know how Rob feels about that.
Zoe, can you restate the question, please?
Yes, my friend. What does, do you ever worry about your work being read as like instructions or instructional? And
Hell no, that's what I'm here to do.
Not worried about nothing.
Right?
So that question, honestly, so I'll go a little bit deeper. You know, when I was at Micah for undergrad, for those that don't know, that's where I went for undergrad. I always had a proclivity towards directness, towards not leaving room for like, well, you know, take them on a, you know, allow them for no, I wanted to like tell you what I think. You here to see my work, you gonna hear what I think, okay? And like, I honestly don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that at all. I think there's a purpose for work that operates in that vein, and that's not for everyone and for everything. And if you don't agree or you don't get what I'm putting out there, then that's fine. It's not for you.
I wanted to, if Zoe's finished, I didn't know if she had a follow-up question. My name is Ayodele Carter Davis, by the way. Forgive me for not introducing myself. In response to your question about removing the current identity structure and what happens after that, right? What's left? For me, it comes down to character. It comes down to the person, right? When you remove the power structure, and if you look at the word power, what that means. In my tradition as a Lukumi Yoruba, power is ashe, the ability to do. So now that you don't have the ability to repress people, you don't have the ability to subjugate people, what are you going to do with your power? You can heal, you can cultivate, you can create, you can laugh, you can dance, right? I think removing the structure that's repressive gives everyone an opportunity to do what they love. And that's my prayer.
Yes, thank you for that. I think it would actually be so liberating for so many people that happen to be born white.
Hi, this is Nico, and I identify as white. And I'd written in the comments earlier that I think it could be liberating. And yeah, I totally agree. It sort of makes me think of my friend's Pomeranian, who barks at everybody and tries to bite them when they come in the door. And this dog is so stressed out and it's constantly trying to like defend its position and its household members, even though it doesn't need to, but it has this in its head, and like breaking that habit of it or mindset that this dog has is very difficult. But from what I've heard, they've been working on this. Their dog trainer says that the dog is actually really stressed out because it's like this great burden that it carries, having to like defend this like household and this structure that it thinks it needs to defend. And that if it can see itself in a different role and not play that role of, you know, the defender of this structure, it actually can relax and be a much happier animal. Yeah, I just want to agree with what was just said. And I think it's maybe counterintuitive for a lot of white people in that position of power and that structure that is being defended and upheld. But I think it's totally right. I think there's this, yeah, I think it would bring a lot of liberation for everybody involved. I think getting through that is probably going to be challenging, but yeah, I think it'd be liberating for everybody.
Thanks, Nico. So I guess we're at the end of our extension, and thank you all for staying the rest of the time. Some of your faces I know, and so I see the questions on them and that they just haven't surfaced yet. And I welcome you all to reach out to me, and I'm also extending an invitation that Rob didn't extend to reach out to Rob about questions that you might have for us, because I see the questions. I know the questions haven't made their way into words yet, and we want to be in conversation. That's why we do the work that we do. So thank you, Rob. Thank you to Tefra, Institute of Contemporary Art, for hosting this. Thank you to Zoe Charlton and Tim Dowd for curating this wonderful show and giving me the opportunity to share this work and bring it into the world. I literally cannot see my work unless people give me spaces large enough for me to realize it. And so I appreciate that. And I appreciate the people who helped me be able to realize it in those spaces. So thank you, Erica. And thank you, Sophia, for your work doing that. And to my mama, who was my installation road dog. I hope you all have a great night. Hearts to you.
Hey, Janelle. Before Janelle
Yes.
maybe jumps in, I just want to say this. So my name is Robert Gowdy. I'm the current board chair at Tefra ICA. And I just want to say thank you to Rob. I want to say thank you to O for an amazing exhibition. I'm here with my mama too. She's part of my rock.
Yes, Mama's for the win. Hi, Mama.
Shout out to Mama.
Yes, mamas.
And I do want to say with, I hope humility and certainly a lot of naivete, because I'm not sure probably all that I'm walking into by saying this. I just want to say, oh, not sweating. Thank you.
All right, okay. He said we can burn things in the gallery, you all.
Well, this is fantastic. I have one last request before we get ready to call it a night. And again, I have to echo Robert and Erica and all of the guests that have joined us tonight. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your work, your advice, your experiences with us tonight, Rob and O. This has been a very personal evening. It's felt very spiritual, and there's been some great beauty here, and it feels nice. And I would like to open it up to Rob and O one more time, because there's so much that was talked about this evening. And like O said, there are questions that people have. I wonder if there's one thing you want to leave this group with tonight. And it could be, again, in the way of an experience. It can be in the way of an action. It can be in the way of a piece of advice or hope or prayer. What would you leave this group with tonight before we head out?
This is an invitation for me, myself, and O. Okay. If you don't mind, I'll go first. I think the first thing that, or the one thing that I would say to folks is start now. Start where you are. You know, there's nothing more that you need to know, that you need to learn, that you need to do to be ready. Start now.
That's your mic drop? Okay. And I would add to that that the work, quote unquote, so often in organizing spaces, we use the work to mean the work of kind of dismantling these systems, the work of birthing a world that creates space and provides resources for everyone to be able to live with ease and thrive, which is my personal definition of liberation. In the art world, we also use the work, and we talk about the work usually as the product of a process, you know, whatever it is that we're showing or sharing. And in both those spaces, in the art world and in the organizing world, sometimes the parameters are off of what the work can be, how it can look, how it can show up, are really narrow, you know, or even just the options or the examples that you're shown of what the work or how the work can be are really narrow. And so sometimes what we end up doing is working within the confines of somebody else's limited imagination, which is actually way smaller than our realities and possibilities, which are infinitely expansive. And so the thing that I guess I would leave people with is, hopefully you're leaving here and you're like, I already have a political home, or I'm going to go find a political home, or I want to experience that feeling of, you know, power and empowerment. How do I do this? Or I have homework. I want to engage these communities or read these books. And I want to say, you know, on the internet, there's people are like, okay, you have to buy all 50 of these books and read them. Or people are like, you got to go to all of the protests and be there in the front. Or, you know, there's all sorts of different ways, or you have to know all of the words, the right words actually to say, and you have to know the right words to not say. There's all of these kind of parameters that we could internalize, but the work actually can look as many ways as we do in the world. And so, you know, Rob says start now, and I say start now, start from where you are, and also start from who you are and who you're with. So make it work for you. Like, work where you are, work in a way that works for you. It may not look like other people's. Have some accountability buddies and do it. That's my parting word, I would say.